And today's date is June the 2nd, 2009, and we are currently at the Pleasant Valley Country Club in Little Rock doing a interview for the Arkansas Korean War Project for the Butler Center for Arkansas Studies. And your name?
I'm delighted to be here.
Well, thank you.
My name is Steve Stevens. I'm from Little Rock. I was born in Newport, Arkansas in 1930. I'm 79 as we make this interview.
All right. So, Steve, tell me a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about your background. You said you're from Newport. Who are your parents, and what did they do for a living?
My parents were wonderful, wonderful parents. They were very, very, very good to me. They always wanted me to have more than they had. I was born in the depths of the Depression, the Great Depression. I was born in 1930, and when I got older, I asked my mother, I said, well, why did you all have me in the depths of the Depression? She said, well, we didn't give it another thought. We just thought it would always be this way. And but my mother had a miscarriage before me, and so they were always told me they were very pleased that I was an only child. And I grew up in a little town called Newport, and it was kind of an Ozzie and Harriet time. I really enjoyed it. I would ride my bicycle anywhere I wanted to go, and Mother and Dad just say, we'll be back by dark. Nobody ever heard of the word pedophile, or kidnapping was something that happened to Charles Lindbergh's child. It was just fleetingly in the paper. And it was really a wonderful time. It was a small town of 5,000. And everything rocked along rather quietly until 1941. And I remember I came out of the movie there in Newport. It was called the Strand Theater. And it was a bright, sunny Sunday afternoon. And some kid came up and said, hey, did you hear? The Japs attacked Pearl Harbor. I said, where's Pearl Harbor? And they said, what's in the Hawaiian Islands? And so they attacked us. And that's the first I'd heard about it. And so everybody was totally confused and knowing not what to do. Everybody was very patriotic. Almost anybody of age wanted to enlist. And my mother and dad were glad that I was only 10 years old. 10 years old, right? And so shortly thereafter, I think about a year after that, the sleepy little town of Newport, 5,000, was electrified when it was announced that the Air Corps at that time was going to build an air base there in Newport for basic training for pilots. The population exploded, of course, with soldiers. And in retrospect, my mother and dad were born on a farm. And I've got a picture of my father when he was 15 years old, standing in a cotton field with his father, and he looked real sad. And I said, Dad, why did you look so sad? He said, well, I knew I had to figure out a way of getting off that farm. So he did. He came into town, which was Newport at that time, had one job and another. He and Mother married when he was 18 and she was 18, and they had me when they were 20. And then they had, just small jobs here and there. Then he became an employee of a combination cafe and a service station. And one day, the man who owned the combination service station and restaurant came to him and he says, I just can't make it. I'm going to go back to Detroit and work in the car factory there where they produce Chryslers. And he said, you can have this whole operation for $100. And so Dad told Mother that, and he said, gee, we don't have $100. She said, I can get it. And he said, where? She said, from my sister in Little Rock. So she said she always, quote, rat holes away money, and she is a widow. So Mother went to the sheriff of Jackson County, the county in which Newport was located, and said, the next time you take a prisoner down to Little Rock, can I ride with you for the day? And he said, sure. So she and the sheriff and the prisoner rode to Little Rock, and she went to her sister who worked in a laundry, and she said it was hot and humid, no air conditioning, and she saw her sister, and she said, I need to borrow $100 because my husband and I have a chance to buy this business. And so my aunt, her sister, she said, well, how do I know you'll pay me back? And my mother said, I'll pay you back in 6 months. And she said, so she reached down into her brassiere and pulled out in 10s and 20s here, the $100. They came back, and Mother said she did indeed pay off her sister in 6 months. And I said, how did you know you could pay her back in 6 months? And she said, I didn't know it. She said, but we did. So they bought this combination cafe and service station, which was at the end of the White River Bridge, and it was called the Bridge Service Station. And Dad renamed it Owen Stevens Bridge Service Station. His name, of course, was Owen. And they did rather well there. They did so well that they had a house built for themselves in Newport that cost $3,000, and it was all paid for when they moved into it. And that's where I grew up, on 1011 Holden Avenue in Newport. And then, in retrospect, back to when the air base was located there in Newport, Dad had a chance to buy a restaurant in downtown Newport. So I don't know what happened to the Bridge Service Station and cafe, how they got rid of that. But at any rate, they bought this restaurant in Newport, and that was where they really were able to do quite well. In the midst of that, Dad was called up by the Selective Service to be drafted. He came to Little Rock, and he was turned down on medical reasons because of his heart, and so he didn't have to serve. That it also ironically gave him the opportunity of running that restaurant and serving all of those servicemen there in the air base, and they did quite well. And finally, they worked night and day, and so finally he sold that. And guess who he sold it to? Sold it to Mother's sister, the one she borrowed $100 from. Yeah. And they did well with it. But Mother and Dad would just work to death because they worked every day, 7 days a week, and they needed to rest. And I remember as a little boy, after Dad sold it, seeing him lying on the couch during the day, and I said, well, aren't you ever going to go back to work? Because I'd never seen him, not have a job. And he said, oh yeah, I will. And it taught me a lesson that there's always somebody watching you, what you're doing, whether you know it or not. And a man who owned the furniture store in Newport came to Dad and said, I've watched you, you're a hard worker, you're real dedicated to whatever you do. I want to expand and put a furniture store in New Mexico. So would you like to buy in partnership with me, this furniture store? So Dad said yes. And they did just really, really excellent there, because Dad was a great salesman. I'll tell you a salesman story in a minute. And so eventually the man wanted to expand into another state, and so he said, do you want to just buy me out? So what was Bolin Stevens, Bolin was Dad's partner, became Stevens Furniture Company, and they operated that for 20 years and did very, very well there until Dad sold it finally. He wanted me to take over the business, and I told him I just, had all the retail experience I really felt I wanted, because I worked there at high school and so forth. But the story I was going to tell you about selling was, when I would work there in the furniture store, people would come in, and we sold appliances also. And so my dad said, how come it is that these people are coming in and they talk to you and they leave? I said, well, because they want to buy a Frigidaire, and we don't have Frigidaires. We have Norge. He said, well, I'm going to tell you how to handle that. So the next person who came in, they said, I'd like to look at a Frigidaire. I said, let me show you this Norge Frigidaire. See, I wasn't listening. Frigidaire is a generic kind of name. So that was one of the many interesting lessons that my parents taught me, especially about in retail. So then I graduated high school, played football. Took out a year and went to Castle Heights Military Academy in Lebanon, Tennessee, because I wanted to go there. And that was enough. A year was enough. But it taught me how to march, some military techniques and so forth, which really helped me out later in the Marine Corps, because I just slid right into the military regime. I went to the University of Arkansas, and I was there 2 years, and joined a fraternity called Kappa Alpha, which was a Southern fraternity. And most of the fellows in that fraternity were returning GIs going to college on the GI Bill of Rights. And I always had a fascination with World War II, and I looked up to those fellows. They were older than me, and so that's why I joined that fraternity. I graduated in 1948, 1949. I was there at the university, and the war in Korea broke out in 1950. And I didn't have to, I would not have been drafted, because at the U of A, I joined the Naval Reserve. So as a member of the Naval Reserve, I couldn't be called up except by the Navy, and I was not subjected to the draft. But I was home one summer, and one of my good friends in high school had been called up and was going to be drafted. He knew what his draft number was, but he didn't want to go in the Army, and he was confused and what to do. And we were talking, and you know how, gosh, I was about 20 years old then, I guess. And I said, well, you know what, I don't have to go, but I'll tell you what, I'll go with you if we join the Marines. He said, why the Marines? I said, I don't know, they just seem to be a cut above all the rest. And so anyway, we joined the Marines. And I went home and told my mother, and she said, oh my God, of all things, there's the Coast Guard, the Air Force, the Navy. Why the Marines? I said, I don't know, just sounded glamorous, you know. So we did that, and we went to if you enlist west of the Mississippi, you go to San Diego for boot camp. East of the Mississippi, you go to Parris Island, South Carolina. So we enlisted, and for 3 days, I think there was about 7 or 8 of us on the train. We went out, took us about 3 days to go from Little Rock to Los Angeles. And it was really wonderful because, you know, all the food was taken care of. At night, you could sleep and look out the window and see the desert going by. And we stopped in cities that I'd never, you know, like Tucumcari, New Mexico, never heard of that before. And it was really quite an adventure, and it was wonderful and carefree. And then we got to Los Angeles. I never will forget, the porter there said, welcome to Los Angeles, the city of angels and 80 million little devils. I remember something of that sort. But and then we got off, and we were put on a bus. The Marine Corps put us on a bus and bussed us down to San Diego. And that's when reality hit us smack dab in the face. You know, they shave off all your hair, and they immediately, and the Marine Corps has a philosophy, a theory which has worked. They tear you down, strip you emotionally of all you thought you were, and then begin to build you up into what they think you should be. And it is what you should be, because they teach you, you know, courage and fidelity and honor and how to be a fighting person. But that was a fabulous experience that lasted 3 months. When I came out of there, I was just at the top of my health. You know, you wake up at 4:30 in the morning, you exercise all day, and you learn about the Marine Corps and tactics and fighting tactics and so forth. And you go to bed at 10 o'clock, and you do that for 3 months. You come out a real physical specimen. When you walk out that gate, your buttons are popping off, and you're really proud to be a Marine. And of course, you know, there's the old saying is, once a Marine, always a Marine, and that's true. So then I was transferred. My first duty station was Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. From there I went to headquarters of Marine Corps. From headquarters of Marine Corps, I went to Quantico. And from Quantico, I went to Camp Pendleton for combat training. And what's really funny, there was a famous Marine from Little Rock named John Yancey, won the Silver Star, a legendary kind of fellow. When I was taking my combat training in Camp Pendleton, he was in Little Rock, and my mother belonged to the American Legion Auxiliary. She invited him to speak because she'd heard me speak of him. So he spoke at the American Legion Auxiliary in Newport, and she went up to him. She said, you know, very sad, and she said, my son's in Camp Pendleton taking combat training, and he's on his way to Korea. And she expected some condolence and something, and instead he put his arm around and said, "Well, bless your soul, I know you're proud." And she said that wasn't what she expected at all. But so we boarded the ship in San Diego. It took us 18 days. This is kind of interesting, I think. While we were taking our training there at Camp Pendleton, every morning we had to fall out at 4:30. It was still dark, and be accounted for. And I was a squad leader. I was a sergeant, and the lieutenant would come by and I'd say, "All present are accounted for, sir." Well, this one morning, one fellow was missing out of my squad, and so there was a kid next to me who we called him Mouse because he was so little. I said, "Mouse, get back in there and tell that fellow to come back out here. I'm going to have to report him absent." So he ran in and he came back. He said he's not coming out, Sergeant. I said, "Hurry up, get back in there and tell him to come out, or I'll have to report him as absent." He came out. He said, "He told you to, you know what you can do to yourself. He's not coming out." So I said, "Okay." So the lieutenant came by and said, "1 man absent, sir." And I gave his name, and I went into the Quonset hut, and he, by that time, this fellow had become fully awake, and he had lipstick all over him, and he was just sobering up apparently. And he said, "They told me what you did. You reported me as absent. I want to tell you something, Sarge. It's going to take us 18 days to get to Korea. You ain't going to arrive there." And so then I responded with some expletives, which I thought were pretty good, convincing. And but then I thought, for 18 days, I'm going to have to really watch my back. If I go out, on topside at night, I could just disappear. So I thought this is really going to be quite an unpleasant trip. Well, a week later, he went to Tijuana and he didn't come back. I presume he went AWOL. But that was a very serendipity, to say the least. So then, during that 18 days, we were stacked, I think, at least 5 bunks high. Then, fellows some were seasick. I had to fight it a couple of days really bad and never threw up, but there was a lot of that going on. And we left about 3 days before Christmas. We had a guy dressed up like Santa Claus that came around and entertained us on Christmas Eve. This is interesting. On Christmas Eve, up topside, they were singing "Silent Night, Holy Night," and at the fantail of the ship, they were practicing their machine gun drills. They say "Silent Night, Holy Night."
Quite a contrast.
So a real contrast. And so about 5 or 6 days, we ran into a typhoon, and we all had to stay below deck. And every night we'd go to sleep, you'd hear the bow of the ship would be crashing into the sea, and go just regular like that. And you go to sleep with that, hearing that rhythm of the sea crashing into the bow of the ship. And then about the third morning, I woke up and it was deadly quiet. And I looked around and there wasn't anybody in any of their bunks. And I thought, what's going on? So I jumped up and went up topside. What had happened is we had gone through the typhoon, and a merchant ship had radioed us that a merchant seaman had a heart attack. And so our ship was dead in the water, and the merchant ship was, our troop ship was, and they were sending him a breach buoy, I think is what they call it, from their ship over to our ship. And then we went on our way, and then later I asked what happened, and they said, well, he did die. And but we had a doctor. The merchant ship didn't have a doctor. That was the reason for that. But during the typhoon, it was really quite something. On a troop ship, you have to eat standing up to save space, and the tables are all aluminum, and there'd be a coffee pot here or salt and pepper, and the ship would go like this, and, and you have to grab it, and it would this way, you let go, and slide back down to the other side. And it was really quite an experience. We arrived in Sasebo and then Yokohama, and then eventually we anchored outside of Incheon. And then we landed at night at Incheon, in one of the LST type ships where the front comes down. I don't think it's called an LST. I think that means landing ship tank. It was landing ship personnel. And as we went ashore, it was dark. Somebody said, "Can any of you guys type?" And I could type because I had taken this equip course in college. And in the Marine Corps, you're taught never to volunteer because the Marine Corps will tell you what they want you to do, and you'll do it. But for some reason, I said, "Yeah, I can type." He said, "How good are you?" I said, "I'm really good." And so he said, "Get over here." All the other guys, they threw them in, I think they called it 6x6 trucks, and they went right up to the MLR, the main line of resistance. And they pulled me over to the side with a group of others, maybe about 10, put us in a truck, and drove us up to headquarters, Marine Corps, where the Marine Corps general, who was in charge of the entire Marine forces in Korea, had his headquarters, and I was assigned to the dispersing office. The dispersing office pays all the other troops. It was just the luck of the draw, because every Marine is trained as a basic Marine. I think your MOS is 3,400. If you're a cook, if you're a librarian, if you're what, you've got to be a basic Marine. You've got to qualify with a rifle and a handgun. And so that's what you are basically. You never know what they all want you to do. So I was very fortunate in that, but I do remember as we were going up that night, I heard boom, 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 boom. I thought, my God, this is real. Because all of our training at Camp Pendleton had been, simulated. You'd hear that and you'd say, "Wow, it's just, they're putting us through this to prepare us." But then when you hear the actual artillery going off, you think, the playfulness is over. This is real. But so anyway, we went to headquarters Marine Corps, and that's where I was assigned once a month. We all had to carry an M1 rifle wherever you went, to the head, wherever, eating. But once a month, I'd strap on a 45 and go with an officer. I was a sergeant in a little, I think it was 3 or 4 man bubble kind of helicopter, and fly to a hospital ship in Incheon Harbor. Because it was a United Nations war, and every member of the United Nations contributed something. And Denmark contributed a hospital ship called the Jutlandia, and it had a great big Red Cross on the side. And so the Marine Corps had a PR philosophy that I don't care how badly you were wounded, you'd get paid on payday. And so it was script, not really regular US dollars, but a script type of currency. So we would fly, and it was really considered to be choice duty to be able to do that once a month, because you would fly aboard this hospital ship, which was just, it was just super clean, and they had Norwegian nurses, blonde nurses, and we hadn't had that luxury of seeing anything like that, and then we'd go around to each bunk and lay the money on the bed of these wounded Marines. They were all, our people were all Marines. And I remember one was a Marine who had been badly burned, and it was a canopy over his body, so nothing could touch him. And we visited with him and put his money there. But that was interesting. We'd be flying along the real low along the hilltops, and we could see these papasons with the A-frames on the back, carrying all kinds of huge loads, and then we'd fly back at the end of the day. So and then while I was there, a monsoon occurred which is normal each year when the monsoon season comes around. It just rains all the time, and wherever you go, it's raining and wet. And we got through that, and then it was cold, very, very cold in the wintertime. The phrase to describe Korea is the land of the morning calm. That's their motto. We always said it's the land that God forgot, because it was so desolate and unhospitable. Years later, when I went back, I could not believe how they had prospered, how well they had done. The Korean people, I have great admiration for them because they have great willpower. And I was with a group taken back to Korea where we were given the Peace Medal and declared as ambassadors of peace. And it was a wonderful experience to see how Korea had thrived with skyscrapers, people well dressed, modern cars everywhere you went. It was just quite a revelation to see that. So I think that's about the extent of my Korean experience, which was it was a year long. And oh yeah, one final thing: when we were on this troop ship, as we were coming back, every day a newsletter was issued, and tell us what the weather would be like the next day and what was happening in the world. Just a very cheaply produced newsletter. And so the day before we got back, the newsletter said at 4 a.m. we will enter under the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. At 4 a.m., 4,000 troops were above deck. And I get kind of emotional thinking about it, but there was 4,000 huge yells went up as we went under the Golden Gate Bridge. And this is interesting. About, I don't know how many hours out, this was at night, or early in the morning, before we got to the Golden Gate Bridge, the aroma from the States was a sweet smell. And the reason for that was, in the Orient, they fertilize with human feces. They call it night soil. And everything it permeates your clothes and all that. I remember when I got home and unpacked, my mother said, boy, your luggage has a strange aroma to it. And we had become accustomed to that. And so as we got close to the U.S., that sweet smell, a fresh smell, was just really quite significant. So that's it.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. We appreciate you visiting with us today and being part of the Korean War Project.
My pleasure.